A priest vanished without a trace in 1943. 81 years of silence, and then, behind the sealed walls of a confessional booth where he once heard sins, his skeleton tells a story more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. If you want to discover the darkest secret ever hidden inside an American church, subscribe to this channel right now, hit the bell icon, and leave a like, because what I'm about to tell you will change everything you thought you knew about World War II and the secrets buried in small-town America. Ironwood, Michigan, winter of 1943. This small mining town in the Upper Peninsula, right on the border with Wisconsin, was home to barely 5,000 souls. Most were miners, working in the iron ore mines that gave the town its name. It was a harsh place with brutal winters where temperatures dropped to 30 below zero, where snow piled 6 feet high, where the wind cut through your clothes like knives. But it was also a tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone, where families had lived for generations, where the church was the center of social life. And at the heart of this community stood St. Ambrose Catholic Church, a beautiful stone building erected in 1902 by Italian and Polish immigrants who had come to work in the mines. Serving this church was Father Vincent Moretti, a 42-year-old priest who had arrived in Ironwood in 1938. Father Moretti was beloved by everyone in town. He was a short man, about 5 feet 6 inches tall, with dark hair that was beginning to gray at the temples, warm brown eyes behind round wire-rimmed glasses, and a gentle smile that could comfort even the most troubled soul. He spoke fluent Italian, Polish, and English, which made him perfect for this immigrant community. He visited the sick in their homes, even in the worst winter storms. He comforted miners' widows when their husbands died in cave-ins or accidents. He baptized babies, married young couples, buried the dead. He organized food drives for families struggling during the war. He was more than just a priest. He was a father figure, a counselor, a friend to everyone in Ironwood. But Father Moretti carried a secret so dangerous that it would cost him his life. A secret that would remain buried for 81 years, hidden behind the sealed walls of a confessional booth. It was February 14th, 1943, Valentine's Day, the middle of World War II. Young men from Ironwood were fighting in Europe and the Pacific. Families gathered around radios every night, listening anxiously for news from the front. The war touched everything, even in this remote corner of Michigan. Father Moretti had just finished the 6 o'clock morning mass. There were only 12 people in attendance that freezing Monday morning. The church was cold despite the furnace running. People could see their breath as they prayed. After Mass, Father Moretti stood at the door as always, shaking hands with parishioners as they left, wishing them a blessed day. The last person to see him was Mrs. Anna Kowalski, an elderly Polish woman who attended daily Mass without fail. She remembered shaking his hand, feeling how cold it was, and Father Moretti saying, "Pray for me today, Mrs. Kowalski. I have a difficult task ahead." She thought nothing of it at the time. Priests always had difficult tasks: counseling troubled souls, dealing with family disputes, comforting the grieving. After the last parishioner left, Father Moretti locked the church doors. This was unusual. Normally, the church remained open all day for private prayer. But that morning, Father Moretti locked the doors. He was seen walking back toward the altar, toward the confessional booths at the side of the church, and then nothing. He vanished. When Father Moretti didn't appear for the noon Angelus prayer, the church secretary, Miss Dorothy Sullivan, became concerned. She had worked at St. Ambrose for 15 years, and Father Moretti was never late, never missed an obligation. She went to the rectory, the small house next to the church where Father Moretti lived. She knocked. No answer. She tried the door. It was unlocked. She entered, calling out. The rectory was empty. The breakfast dishes were washed and put away. The bed was made. Everything was neat and orderly, exactly as Father Moretti always kept it, but the priest was nowhere to be found. Miss Sullivan went to the church. The doors were still locked from the inside. She used her key to enter. The church was empty, silent, cold. She called out for Father Moretti. Her voice echoed in the empty space. No response. She walked through the church, checking the sacristy, the choir loft, the basement. Nothing. Father Moretti had vanished. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when Father Moretti still hadn't appeared and had missed 2 scheduled appointments, Miss Sullivan called the police. Chief of Police Harold Jensen arrived with 2 deputies. Chief Jensen was a practical Norwegian immigrant in his 50s who had been the police chief of Ironwood for 20 years. He organized a search. They searched the church thoroughly. They searched the rectory. They searched the church grounds, though the snow was so deep it was nearly impossible to see anything. They found nothing. No sign of Father Moretti. No footprints leading away from the church in the fresh snow that had fallen that morning. No signs of a struggle. Nothing. The search expanded. Volunteers from the parish joined the police. They searched the neighborhood around the church. They knocked on doors, asking if anyone had seen Father Moretti. No one had. They searched the nearby woods, though it seemed impossible that anyone would venture into the frozen forest in the middle of winter. They searched until darkness fell and the temperature dropped to 20 below zero, making it too dangerous to continue. The next day, the search resumed. More volunteers joined. The state police were called in. Detectives from Marquette, the nearest large city, arrived to help. They interviewed everyone who had been at morning mass. They interviewed everyone who knew Father Moretti. They searched his rectory more thoroughly, looking for clues. They found his wallet with $32 inside. They found his winter coat hanging on the rack. They found his boots by the door. Everything suggested that Father Moretti had not planned to go outside. Everything suggested that he had intended to stay in the church. But where was he? The detectives developed several theories. Perhaps Father Moretti had suffered a medical emergency, a heart attack or stroke, and had collapsed somewhere in the church where he hadn't been found yet. But they had searched every inch of the church multiple times. Perhaps he had been kidnapped. But why? And by whom? And how could someone kidnap a priest from a locked church in broad daylight without anyone seeing? Perhaps he had simply decided to leave, to abandon his vocation and start a new life somewhere else. But why would he leave his money, his coat, his boots, in the middle of a brutal Michigan winter? It made no sense. The most disturbing theory came from Detective Robert Morrison, an experienced investigator from Marquette, who had worked dozens of missing persons cases. Morrison believed that Father Moretti had been murdered, but by whom? And why? And most importantly, where was the body? Morrison focused his investigation on the church itself. He questioned everyone who had access to the church. He looked into Father Moretti's personal life, searching for anyone who might have had a motive to harm him. He discovered something interesting. In the weeks before his disappearance, Father Moretti had seemed troubled. Several parishioners mentioned that he had seemed distracted, worried, not his usual cheerful self. He had been spending long hours in the church alone, praying. One parishioner, Mr. Giuseppe Lombardi, an Italian immigrant who worked in the mines, told Detective Morrison something significant. About a week before Father Moretti disappeared, Mr. Lombardi had gone to confession. While waiting his turn outside the confessional booth, he had heard raised voices inside. Father Moretti and another man were arguing. Mr. Lombardi couldn't hear the words clearly, but the tone was angry, threatening. When the other man emerged from the confessional, Mr. Lombardi got a brief look at him. He was a tall man, well dressed in an expensive suit, which was unusual in working-class Ironwood. The man had a hard face, cold eyes, and he walked out of the church quickly, without making the sign of the cross or genuflecting, which any Catholic would do. Mr. Lombardi thought it was strange, but he didn't think much of it at the time. Detective Morrison asked Mr. Lombardi if he could identify the man. Mr. Lombardi said he thought he could, but he had never seen the man before or since. Morrison showed him photographs of various people, but Mr. Lombardi couldn't identify anyone. The mysterious, well-dressed man remained unidentified. Morrison also discovered something else. In the days before his disappearance, Father Moretti had written several letters. One was to the Bishop of Marquette, the diocese that oversaw St. Ambrose Church. Another was to his brother in New York. Morrison obtained copies of these letters. The letter to the bishop was formal, discussing routine church business. But there was one odd sentence at the end. "If anything should happen to me, please know that I acted according to my conscience and my duty to God." The letter to his brother was more revealing. Father Moretti wrote, "Dear Antonio, I find myself in a difficult situation. I have learned something in the confessional that troubles me deeply. You know I cannot break the seal of confession, but I fear that my knowledge puts me in danger. If you do not hear from me, please pray for my soul. Your loving brother, Vincent." These letters suggested that Father Moretti knew he was in danger. They suggested that he had learned something dangerous in the confessional. But what? The seal of confession is one of the most sacred rules in the Catholic Church. A priest can never, under any circumstances, reveal what someone confesses to him. The penalty for breaking the seal of confession is automatic excommunication. Father Moretti would never break that seal, even if it cost him his life. But what had someone confessed to him that was so dangerous? Detective Morrison had a theory. It was February 1943, the middle of World War II. America was at war with Germany, Italy, and Japan. And there were rumors, whispers in Ironwood and other towns across America, of spies, of saboteurs, of people working for the enemy. What if someone had confessed to Father Moretti that they were a spy? What if they were passing information to the Germans? What if Father Moretti, bound by the seal of confession, couldn't report this to the authorities, but the spy feared he might? What if the spy decided to silence Father Moretti permanently? Morrison investigated this angle. He looked into whether there were any suspected spies or saboteurs in the Ironwood area. He contacted the FBI, which was responsible for counterintelligence during the war. The FBI had files on several people in the Upper Peninsula who were suspected of having Nazi sympathies. Most were German immigrants who had expressed support for Hitler before the war, but none of them seemed to have any connection to Father Moretti or St. Ambrose Church. The investigation stalled. Weeks turned into months. The search for Father Moretti was quietly shelved. The case remained officially open, but no one was actively working on it anymore. The Bishop of Marquette sent a replacement priest, Father Patrick O'Brien, a young Irish priest in his 30s, to take over at St. Ambrose. Life in Ironwood slowly returned to normal. The war continued. Young men kept dying in Europe and the Pacific. Families kept grieving, and Father Moretti became just another casualty of the war years, another mystery that would never be solved. If you're still watching this video, if this story is gripping you as much as it gripped the people of Ironwood for 81 years, leave a like right now. Help me spread this story to as many people as possible, and if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, because I'm about to reveal what was discovered in 2024 that finally solved this 81-year-old mystery. Years passed. The war ended in 1945. The soldiers came home, some whole, some broken, some not at all. Ironwood slowly declined as the iron ore mines began to close. Young people moved away to find work in other cities. The population shrank. By the 1980s, Ironwood had fewer than 3,000 residents. St. Ambrose Church remained, still serving the community, though the congregation was much smaller than in Father Moretti's time. The older generation, those who had known Father Moretti personally, gradually died off. By the 2000s, almost no one remembered the priest who had vanished in 1943. He was just a footnote in the church's history, a curious mystery that occasionally came up in conversation but held no real significance for younger generations. In 2023, the Diocese of Marquette decided that St. Ambrose Church needed major renovations. The building was 121 years old. The roof leaked. The foundation had cracks. The heating system was ancient and inefficient. The electrical wiring was outdated and potentially dangerous. The diocese allocated funds for a complete restoration. A construction company from Marquette, Northern Michigan Restoration, was hired to do the work. The project manager was a man named Michael Peterson, a third-generation contractor who specialized in historic building preservation. The renovation began in May 2023. The first phase involved repairing the structural damage to the building. This required opening up walls, examining the foundation, checking the integrity of the support beams. The crew worked carefully, knowing they were dealing with a historic building that needed to be preserved. In January 2024, the crew began work on the side chapel where the confessional booths were located. There were 3 confessional booths, built in the traditional style with a central compartment for the priest and 2 side compartments for penitents. The booths were made of dark oak, beautifully carved, but they were in poor condition. The wood was rotting in places. The doors didn't close properly. The screens that separated the priest from the penitents were torn. The diocese had decided to remove the old confessional booths and replace them with a modern reconciliation room, which was more in keeping with contemporary Catholic practice. On January 15, 2024, the crew began dismantling the confessional booths. They started with the side compartments, carefully removing the doors, the kneelers, the screens. Then they began working on the central compartment where the priest would sit. One of the workers, a young man named Jake Martinez, noticed something odd. The back wall of the priest's compartment seemed thicker than it should be. He tapped on it. It sounded hollow. He called over Michael Peterson. Peterson examined the wall carefully. He realized that there was a false wall, a panel that had been installed behind the original back wall of the confessional. It had been done so skillfully that it was almost invisible, blending perfectly with the original woodwork. Peterson carefully pried off the false panel. Behind it was a small space, about 3 feet wide, 2 feet deep, and 6 feet tall, just big enough for a person to stand in. And in that space, slumped against the back wall, was a skeleton, a complete human skeleton, still wearing the rotted remains of a black cassock. Next to the skeleton was a priest's stole, the ceremonial scarf worn during confession. And on the floor of the tiny space was a rosary with wooden beads and a small silver crucifix. Peterson stumbled backward, nearly falling. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Call the police. Call them right now." Within an hour, the church was swarming with police officers, forensic investigators, and representatives from the county medical examiner's office. The area around the confessional was cordoned off with crime scene tape. The skeleton was carefully photographed and documented before being removed. The forensic anthropologist who examined the remains at the scene confirmed that they were human, male, approximately 40 to 45 years old at time of death, height approximately 5 feet 6 inches. The skeleton showed signs of trauma. The hyoid bone in the neck was fractured, indicating strangulation. There were also fractures to several ribs, suggesting that the victim had been in a struggle before death. This was clearly not a natural death. This was murder. But whose skeleton was it? The church records were consulted, and there, in the archives, was the answer. Father Vincent Moretti, the priest who had vanished in February 1943, had been 5 feet 6 inches tall, 42 years old. The skeleton was found in the confessional where Father Moretti would have sat to hear confessions. The rotted cassock was the same style worn by priests in the 1940s, and most conclusively, dental records were found in the diocese archives. Father Moretti had had dental work done in 1941. The records showed that he had 3 gold fillings in his upper molars. The skeleton found in the confessional had 3 gold fillings in the exact same teeth. There was no doubt. After 81 years, Father Vincent Moretti had been found. He had been there all along, sealed behind a false wall in his own confessional, in the place where he had heard the sins and sorrows of his parishioners, where he had offered forgiveness and guidance, where he had served God. The news spread across Michigan and then across the nation. Major news networks picked up the story. CNN, Fox News, NBC all sent reporters to Ironwood. The New York Times ran a front-page story. Priest missing since 1943, found dead in church confessional after 81 years. The case that had been forgotten for decades was suddenly the most talked-about mystery in America. The Michigan State Police reopened the investigation. The lead investigator was Detective Sarah Chen, a forensic specialist with 20 years of experience. Chen and her team had the skeleton transported to the State Forensic Laboratory in Lansing for detailed analysis. The forensic pathologist confirmed the cause of death: manual strangulation. The fractures to the hyoid bone and the pattern of damage to the neck vertebrae indicated that someone had strangled Father Moretti with their bare hands. The broken ribs suggested that there had been a violent struggle. Father Moretti had fought for his life, but his attacker had been stronger, and Father Moretti had lost. But how had the body ended up sealed behind a false wall in the confessional? Detective Chen examined the construction of the false wall. It had been built professionally by someone who knew carpentry. The wood matched the original confessional, suggesting that whoever built it had access to matching materials or had taken wood from another part of the church. The false wall had been installed from inside the priest's compartment of the confessional, then sealed shut. This would have required time and privacy. It couldn't have been done quickly or quietly. Someone had spent hours, perhaps an entire night, building this false wall to hide Father Moretti's body. Chen theorized that the murder had happened inside the confessional. Father Moretti had been hearing confession. Someone had entered the confessional, perhaps to confess, perhaps with the intention of killing him. They had strangled him. Then, they had hidden his body behind a false wall, sealing it up so perfectly that no one had discovered it for 81 years. But who, and why? Chen began reviewing all the evidence from the original 1943 investigation. She read through hundreds of pages of witness statements, detective notes, and reports. She studied the letters Father Moretti had written before his death. She focused on the mysterious, well-dressed man that Mr. Giuseppe Lombardi had seen arguing with Father Moretti in the confessional a week before the disappearance. Who was this man? Chen decided to dig deeper into the World War II angle. She contacted the National Archives in Washington, D.C., requesting any FBI files related to suspected spies or saboteurs in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan during the war. What she discovered was shocking. There had been a German spy ring operating in the Great Lakes region during World War II. The FBI had been tracking them since 1941. The spy ring was passing information about iron ore shipments from the Upper Peninsula mines to German U-boats in the Atlantic. The iron ore was crucial for American steel production, which was essential for the war effort. The Germans wanted to know how much ore was being shipped, when, and by what routes, so they could target the shipments. The FBI files revealed that the spy ring had several members, including a man named Klaus Richter, a German immigrant who had come to America in the 1930s and had settled in Ironwood. Richter owned a small import-export business that gave him a legitimate reason to travel frequently. But the FBI suspected he was the leader of the spy ring. They had been building a case against him, gathering evidence, planning to arrest him. But in March 1943, just 1 month after Father Moretti disappeared, Klaus Richter vanished. He was never seen again. The FBI assumed he had fled back to Germany, perhaps aboard a U-boat. The spy ring collapsed without its leader, and the FBI closed the case. Chen requested a photograph of Klaus Richter from the FBI files. When she received it, she showed it to the descendants of the parishioners who had known Father Moretti. One of them was the grandson of Giuseppe Lombardi, the man who had seen the mysterious, well-dressed man arguing with Father Moretti. The grandson had heard his grandfather describe the man many times before he died. When he saw the photograph of Klaus Richter, he said, "That's him. That's exactly how my grandfather described the man he saw in the church." Chen now had a theory. Klaus Richter, the German spy, had gone to confession with Father Moretti. Perhaps he was a Catholic and felt guilty about his espionage. Perhaps he wanted absolution. Perhaps he confessed everything to Father Moretti, telling him about the spy ring, about passing information to the Germans, about betraying America. Father Moretti, bound by the seal of confession, could not report this to the authorities. But Richter, after leaving the confessional, began to worry. What if Father Moretti broke the seal? What if he went to the FBI? Richter's entire operation would be exposed. He would be arrested, tried for treason, and executed. Richter couldn't take that risk. He decided that Father Moretti had to die. On February 14th, 1943, Richter returned to the church. He waited until after morning mass, when the church was empty. He knew Father Moretti's routine. He knew the priest would be in the confessional, available for private confession. Richter entered the confessional, pretending to confess again. But this time, he attacked. He strangled Father Moretti with his bare hands. Father Moretti fought back, which explained the broken ribs. But Richter was younger and stronger. Father Moretti died in his confessional, killed by the very man whose sins he had heard. But Richter couldn't just leave the body there. It would be discovered immediately. He needed to hide it. Richter was skilled with his hands. His import-export business required him to build crates and do carpentry work. He knew how to work with wood. That night, Richter returned to the church with tools and materials. He worked through the night, building a false wall behind the priest's compartment of the confessional. He sealed Father Moretti's body behind that wall, creating a tomb that would remain hidden for 81 years. Then Richter cleaned up, removed all evidence of his work, and left. A month later, fearing that the FBI was closing in on him, Richter fled. He probably did escape to Germany, perhaps dying during the final chaotic months of the war. He was never brought to justice for his espionage or for the murder of Father Moretti. Detective Chen held a press conference in February 2024 to announce her findings. After 81 years, we can finally say with confidence what happened to Father Vincent Moretti, she said. He was murdered by Klaus Richter, a German spy, on February 14, 1943. Richter killed Father Moretti to prevent him from revealing information about a German spy ring operating in the Upper Peninsula. Richter then sealed Father Moretti's body behind a false wall in the confessional, where it remained hidden until January 2024. While we cannot bring Richter to justice, as he is almost certainly dead, we can at least give Father Moretti the proper burial he deserves and honor his memory. The revelation shocked the nation. How could a priest be murdered in his own church and his body remain hidden for 81 years? How could a German spy operate so brazenly in small-town America during World War II? The story raised troubling questions about security during the war, about how many other spies might have operated undetected, about how many other crimes might have been committed and covered up. The Diocese of Marquette issued a statement expressing profound sorrow for what had happened and pledging to ensure that Father Moretti received a proper burial with full honors. On March 1, 2024, Father Vincent Moretti was finally laid to rest in the cemetery behind St. Ambrose Church. Hundreds of people attended the funeral, including descendants of the families he had served, priests from across Michigan, and even the Bishop of Marquette. Father Moretti's remains were interred with military honors, as he was considered a casualty of World War II, killed by an enemy agent. His headstone read, Father Vincent Moretti, 1901-1943, faithful servant of God, keeper of sacred trust, murdered for his devotion to duty, now at peace. The confessional where Father Moretti was found was removed from the church. The diocese decided that it could not remain in a sacred space, tainted as it was by murder. It was donated to a museum in Marquette that focuses on Upper Peninsula history. The church itself underwent a ceremony of reconsecration, a ritual cleansing to remove the spiritual stain of the crime that had been committed there. The current pastor, Father James Walsh, led the ceremony, praying for the soul of Father Moretti and for healing for the community. The story of Father Moretti's murder became a national sensation. True crime podcasts devoted episodes to it. Documentary filmmakers came to Ironwood to make films about the case. Books were written analyzing the spy ring, the murder, and the 81-year mystery. The church where it happened became a place of pilgrimage for both Catholics seeking to honor Father Moretti's memory and true crime enthusiasts fascinated by the case. But beyond the sensationalism, beyond the media frenzy, there was a deeper truth in this story. It was a story about sacrifice, about a priest who died rather than break the seal of confession. It was a story about evil, about how a spy could commit murder to protect his secrets. It was a story about secrets, about how darkness can hide in plain sight for decades. And it was a story about justice delayed but not denied, about how the truth eventually comes to light no matter how deeply it's buried. Father Vincent Moretti's story reminds us that World War II was fought not just on distant battlefields, but also in small towns across America. It reminds us that spies and saboteurs operated in our communities, threatening our security, committing crimes. It reminds us that some people, like Father Moretti, paid the ultimate price for their devotion to duty and faith. And it reminds us that no secret, no matter how carefully guarded, remains hidden forever. The truth has a way of emerging, even after 81 years, even from behind a sealed wall in a confessional booth. If this story has moved you, if it has made you think about the sacrifices made during World War II, the importance of faith, and the resilience of truth, leave a comment below. Tell me what you think about this case. Do you believe Father Moretti should have broken the seal of confession to report the spy? Or do you believe he did the right thing by maintaining his sacred vow even at the cost of his life? How do you think the church should handle situations where the seal of confession conflicts with public safety? The discussion is open, and I want to hear your thoughts. Today, St. Ambrose Church continues to serve the community of Ironwood. The congregation is smaller than in Father Moretti's time, but it remains a vital part of the town's spiritual life. Most of the current parishioners know the story of Father Moretti. Some are disturbed by it. Others see it as a reminder of the church's long history, its ability to survive tragedy and continue its mission. Father Walsh, in his sermons, sometimes speaks about Father Moretti, honoring his memory and his ultimate sacrifice. He talks about the seal of confession, about why it's so important, about how it allows people to confess their worst sins without fear, knowing that the priest will never reveal what they've said. He talks about how Father Moretti died to protect that sacred trust. The case of Father Vincent Moretti has been officially closed. The mystery that haunted Ironwood for 81 years has been solved, but questions remain. Did Klaus Richter really escape to Germany? Or did he die somewhere in America, his body never identified? Were there other members of the spy ring who were never caught? Did they commit other crimes that were never solved? We'll never know for certain. What we do know is that justice, though delayed, was finally served. Father Moretti's remains were found. His story was told. His memory was honored. And he was finally laid to rest in consecrated ground. surrounded by the community he loved and served. The bones behind the sealed wall have finally been laid to rest. But the lessons of this case remain. Evil can hide in sacred places. Secrets can be buried but not forgotten. And justice, no matter how long it takes, will eventually prevail. Rest in peace, Father Vincent Moretti. Your long wait is over. Your story has been told, and your sacrifice will never be forgotten. You kept the seal of confession even unto death. You were a true priest, a true servant of God, and now, after 81 years, you can finally rest. If you've watched this video all the way to the end, thank you. Please leave a like, subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell, and share this video with everyone you know. Father Moretti's story deserves to be told. His sacrifice deserves to be remembered. And by sharing this video, you're helping to ensure that his memory lives on. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.